Welcome back to ReadingBear. Today, we will take a look at some new malicious compliance stories. And if you enjoyed my content, please don't forget to subscribe to my channel and post some bear emojis in the comments. Let's go!
First one is titled, "Don't upset your farmer neighbor, you may have to pay for it." So this didn't happen to me, but an attorney that I work with regularly as part of my job. He moved from a very high coal area to our rural community. Sold his $2 million house, paid off and inherited from his grandparents, and bought 50+ acres with a huge house in a bedroom community that has a lot of dairy farms. He always used to say how it was much better living up here, both in terms of the lifestyle and monetarily, as his urban $2 million house had property taxes in excess of $40,000 per year. Now, in addition to the huge house, the property was mostly fields, 40-ish acres, and had a 10-acre or so large woodlot. After he moved into his new house, the attorney was approached by his neighbor, one of the area dairy farmers. The farmer told the attorney how he had a handshake agreement with the former owner of the attorney's home property. The farmer would mow the fields for hay 2 to 3 times per year and would harvest a sustainable amount of trees out of the woodlot. In exchange, the former property owner got 10% of the chopped wood, which was more than enough to heat the house all year long without having to run the oil boiler for anything more than hot water. The farmer wanted to keep this arrangement going, as it had worked out well for both parties for over a decade. The attorney thought the former owner was being taken advantage of and refused to do a handshake agreement, but told the farmer to give him a week to draw up a proper contract. The farmer was not overjoyed with making this out to be more than a gentleman's agreement, but agreed to come back the following week. The attorney decided that what would be fair was that the farmer should pay him $1,000 each time he mowed the fields for hay, since the farmer would feed the hay to his cows for free otherwise, completely ignoring that the farmer was using his own equipment and time to do the haying, and that the lawyer deserved 50% of the chopped wood, not 10%, or at least the 50% of the revenue the farmer got from selling the excess chopped wood, again ignoring the equipment and time investment of the farmer. As you can guess, the farmer refused. This all happened in late 2019, when the fields were rather bare and the supply of chopped wood for the house was full. Well, here comes 2020 and now the fields start looking like garbage, because none of the other farmers will pay to hay the fields. In fact, after speaking with the first farmer, all of the other area farmers are unwilling to mow the fields unless the attorney pays them $1,000 per mowing. And, of course, come wintertime the attorney's wood pile is depleted and he has to use the oil boiler to heat his entire home, costing well over $300 per month in winter heating costs. Now we come to early 2021, tax prep season. The farmer, being a good and dutiful community-minded citizen, informs the town that he did not cultivate any of the attorney's land for the entirety of 2020, nor did he know of any other farmers who did. Well, as it turns out, this is a big deal, because in our state farmland is assessed at a much lower value than residential property and additionally has a separate and lower tax rate. The attorney's land had previously been entirely zoned as farmland, except for the house and a few acres of lawn around it. Now, the town sent out an assessor and rezoned the entire 50+ acres as residential, which more than tripled the taxable property value and imposed the residential tax rate rather than the much lower farm tax rate. The attorney was quite surprised and furiously told me, and everyone else we work with, all this past week how he's going to sue the town because they now expect him to pay $50,000 per year in property taxes. Next one is titled, "Gastro You Say?" A few years back I was developing a new vineyard, and due to the nature of the work you end up going through a few men, I settled on a reasonably good crew of 8 for the after planting work that included a bloke we'll call Bobby. When Bobby started with me, he admitted that he had a past that involved some heavy drug use but claimed he was clean for his kids. His brothers must have other ideas because he was soon back on the gear and his work was slipping. Being casual, I don't mind being flexible with time worked as long as there's communication, but Bobby was coming in late, shooting through early and at times simply not turning up. One Monday he didn't turn up, and when I messaged him to find out what was going on, he said something along the lines of, "Sorry mate, I've got a bit of gastro," which is clearly bullshit given his history. He's likely been on a bender and woken up at some whore's place and doesn't know which side of town he's on. This is where the malicious compliance comes in. I've got kids at daycare. I know that once they get crook they are excluded for several days. Why should work be any different? I checked the federal government's health website that recommended exclusion for 3 days after symptoms passed to ensure the big isn't spread. This is too easy, so I reply to his message. That's pretty crap. I can't risk it going through the crew, and with the number of young kids on the farm I can't risk it spreading to them. The government recommends 3 days to let it clear properly, so take the rest of the week to get over it, mate. Bobby's 1-day sickie to get over his hangover had suddenly turned into a week's lost wages, and he couldn't argue because as thick as he was he knew he was just digging himself a hole. Amazingly, he seemed to have learned his lesson and didn't try that bullcrap on me again. Next one is titled, Boy Scout Turned the Tables on Us. Here comes a story from way back when I was a Boy Scout leader for a group of 14 to 15 years old boys. Whenever a new guy went to his first jamboree, we would often send him away to search for a smoke turner. Pretty much the same way others are tasked with getting some blinker fluid. Everybody understood what was going on and kept sending the poor fellow on. Usually they clued in at the 3rd stop or so. But one time we had a clever boy whose first jamboree was a huge thing with 4 to 5k participants and a 60 to 40 split gender-wise. So there were a lot of Girl Scouts attending the same jamboree. We did as we usually did, and sent him out to look for a smoke turner so we wouldn't get smoke in our eyes. And off he went. After some time we realized he hadn't returned and he'd been gone for almost 3 hours. On a smaller jamboree that wasn't a big deal, we would easily find them somewhere. But this thing covered a lot of ground and us leaders were getting a bit stressed about finding our guy. This was before cell phones were common amongst the teenagers in our group. Eventually, just before our worry became bad enough to call in some help, he returned with a huge smile on his face. Turned out he'd clued into being set up pretty soon, but he was also smart enough to realize he basically had the run of the camp and could spend his time flirting with Girl Scouts. He had pretty much introduced himself to any and all Girl Scout troops he could see and started flirting with the prettiest girls. He even showed us a notebook filled with phone numbers and addresses so he could keep in touch with the girls after the jamboree was over. The rest of the platoon didn't believe him at first, but over the next days, our campground was constantly visited by Girl Scouts from all over the country, and when he introduced them to his fellow platoon mates we all believed him. Several of our Boy Scouts had their first summer flings that year thanks to this guy's opportunism. Next one is titled, Sorry I'm blocking your VIP valet service, I have to load the instruments. Band parent president. My son's last year of HS, lots of fun but way too much work, for a well-known private Catholic school. Kids attend from all financial backgrounds, and so donors are a big deal. Some alumni are very well off, and host donation dinner events. The jazz band, about 35 kids, were requested to perform at one such on a private estate. The kids were tired after a full day and afternoon auditions for a city honor band. We got there to find out the indoor stage was taken by a country band for after-dinner dancing, and were told to set up outside about 25 YDS from the entrance. We unloaded our complete set of equipment and instruments that I transported in a ginormous school van, and kids arrived by bus. We set up and start performing, and weather turns terrible. Music stands and sheet music are blowing over, and nobody cares that we're there playing anyway. We finally give it up and gather inside to get out of the weather. The hosts weren't happy we had brought the kids in with all the instruments, so we were told to load them up and get them out as soon as possible. Even though only half the guests have arrived, and we have the kids in one corner, not mixing with the partiers. I had parked the van in the back lot about a 5 minutes walk away. I ran back to the lot strewn with decorative cactus and rocks, now totally dark, and stumbled and flew on loose rock. I really thought I was going break something, but only tore up my hands and knees. I found the truck blocked in by 2 large expeditions. Back to the entrance, requesting help from the valets, and get told it's not their problem. So I go inside to the stage and tell the band. The lead singer nicely requests that the expedition owners please move their vehicles so we can get to the truck. Another trip out, and wait for 10 minutes, and nobody shows. This time I go up onto the stage, request the mic, and not so nicely explain that the kids are tired and need to go home after their performance, but we can't do this unless the SUVs are moved. Now, please. This got everybody's attention for a second before they went back to their drinks, but got some action. On my next trip I was able to move the van. After parking in front and extending the ramp, we're being harassed by the valets, because we're blocking arrivals. I explained that the hosts told us to load as soon as possible, and that moving the van down the street would just delay things further. And then we loaded not as quickly as we could, being more than a little upset and bleeding. We got the kids on the bus and I loaded the last instruments myself, and then we met back at the school 45 minutes away to again unload and put everything away. Fortunately, this was the last donor party that we had to attend for the year. Morale of the story: if you really want to show off some of your students at a donation dinner event, you need to make accommodations for them and their support people. Free entertainment is not free, because you're also forcing the parent volunteers to donate their time, while you wine and dine. If you just want a bunch of students to look pretty, just print a big photo. The donors don't care. Next one is titled, A Jewel of Compliance That Was Only a Tad Malicious with a Little Levity. I hope this is the right place for a tad malicious compliance with a little levity. This happened a long time ago, in a place far, far away, the deep south. In March or April of 1984, I was a 27-year-old U.S. Army captain attending the Chemical Officer Advanced course at Fort McClellan, Alabama. Most nights, I would stop in for a drink or two and maybe a cheeseburger at a neighborhood bar. The waitress was really a cutie. After talking to her for about a month, I decided to ask her out. She told me, approximate conversation since it was nearly 40 years ago, "Sure, I'll go out with you when you give me a 5-carat ring." That was the in I needed. I went to the grocery store and bought a bunch of carrots and some pipe cleaners. I took the best looking 5 carrots, tied them together with the pipe cleaners, and added a ring with another one. I took it to her, and with a big laugh, she agreed to go out that weekend. It was an alright date, but she was not one of the just depend things you read about. We talked a lot during the meal and the drinks after. She had no desire to move around and be an army wife since she was still in college. We stayed friends, and I continued to go to the bar the last few months I was stationed there. Next one is titled, You Want a Reason, I'll Give You a Reason. This happened 20 years ago when I was in final year of school in England, so 15/16 of a year old. At lunchtime we were supposed to stay on school property, but by our final year a lot of kids would head off at lunch to the local shops. My friends and I started doing that. We would walk the 15 minutes to the local chip shop, get some food and walk back. We were never late back, but I can see why the school wasn't keen to let us all wander off at lunchtime getting up to who knows what. So, they decided to clamp down. Our head of year told us that no one was allowed to leave property without a letter from our parents explaining why we had to leave the school grounds and where we would be going. The idea was that we could only leave if our parents wrote to say that we had to go to the dentist, doctors, etc. They also started putting teachers on the gate to make it more difficult to leave, although there was always other ways to get out. I was a good student, good grades, and the kind of student that teachers would come to if they needed a student to organize something. I was seen as responsible. I also didn't like to break rules. I liked to push the line, but I rarely crossed it. So I got my mum to write me a letter. In it she said I would be leaving school every lunchtime to visit the chip shop. I handed it in to the head of year. Her face just dropped and she told me she wasn't happy, but as I had complied with what they had asked us to do, then she had no choice but to let me go. My other friends cared less, so they just found other routes out, but I liked following the rules whilst getting one over the teachers. I have no idea how I got my mum to write the letter. I must have told her that the teacher had asked for a letter that specifically said this. Still slightly proud to this day that I played the system and won. Next one is titled, Don't Use My Bike. Okay, I'll use yours. I am the proud sister to 3 brothers who are 1 year older, then 5 and 7 years younger than me. I've always been the fun sibling to the younger 2. My older brother is more of an introvert while I'm the bubbly extrovert of the family. This story takes place all the way back in the late 80s when I was 9 and my younger brother was 4. One of our favorite things to do was ride our bikes in the driveway. For those of you of my generation, remember Big Wheels? That was the bike he rode at the time, while I had a neon pink Huffy bike. Therefore, my bike was much faster than his, so to give him a thrill, and to maintain my status as the best sibling ever, I would tie a jump rope around the handle of a little wagon and pull him up and down our long driveway. He loved it, I loved it, lots of giggles to be had. Finally, the day came when my mother caught us in the act. Needless to say, she put a quick end to this practice, and I was told explicitly not to pull my little brother around with my bike as it wasn't safe. Initiate malicious compliance. I had very recently become tall enough to ride my mum's bike just as easily as my own. She told me not to pull my little brother around on my bike. She never said anything about hers, so I tied the wagon to her bike and we continued our giggle fest. That is, until I took a curve too fast, the wagon flipped, and my little brother hit the pavement so hard he knocked out his 2 front teeth. It took 3 years for those babies to grow back in. Oops. My mum didn't punish me because she had to admit I completely followed her directions, although I think part of her decision may have come from the incredible amount of guilt I felt about hurting him. Next one is titled, "My brother told me to never turn off the Wi-Fi on his phone, I said okay." For context, I live in Africa in a well-made city. I'm 21 and a student with side jobs that I can do from home. Not that home Wi-Fi systems are always crappy, but I chose a okay plan that would fit my budget after asking my family to chip in on the monthly bills. Sadly, this Wi-Fi can't handle multiple jobs so easily. When everyone has video streams running on their phones, laptops and even TV up to 9 devices, it becomes so hard to work on my computer with the extremely slow internet. So evenings are the worst time for me to work, as everyone gets home then and just wants to chill. I am okay with that as they are helping with the payment. I've told them about the issue, and the solution was that whenever we are not using a device, we shouldn't keep the Wi-Fi on as background data can hog up the connection. And most evenings, I can just have dinner and take a nap. And when I wake up, they'll have gone to sleep already so I can work comfortably. I like the energy I get from waking up too. Back to my story. Last night, everything went as usual. I wake up at 10:30 p.m. and everything is so silent, so satisfying. So I sit on my chair and try to load up my websites. They took way longer than they should to show up, so I decided to go in the router terminal on my computer to see the list of devices connected to the Wi-Fi. 1. My PC. 2. My phone. 3. My brother's phone. 4. My brother's iPad. I was like, oh well, I guess he isn't waking up early tomorrow. But I saw no lights coming from his room. I sneak there and open the door. He's sleeping and none of his devices were there. I go downstairs to the living room and I found his phone charging right by the TV. I say ugh, he forgot to turn off the Wi-Fi. So I opened his phone and did it for him. I searched for the iPad but couldn't find it. I went back to my room to find that the internet was still laggy, but tolerable this time. I sat there for a few hours working until I got sleepy at around 2 a.m. and then went to sleep. This morning at 5 a.m., my brother barges into my room angry and yelling, "Did you turn off the Wi-Fi on my phone?" And me, rubbing my sleepy eyes, said, "Yeah." He yelled back, "Never touch my phone and turn off the Wi-Fi again," and slammed the door on his way out of the room. I think he was downloading a large file or something overnight. I got angry as I was woken up to hear this crap, and now I can't even go back to sleep. I thought about what he said, and the idea came to me. Here's the malicious compliance. I'm the only computer geek at home, so I manage the Wi-Fi and such. I got up immediately and got on my computer, opened my Wi-Fi console and got to it. My router lets you create multiple SSIDs, I don't even know why. Basically, it means that from the same router, you can have 2 Wi-Fi signals with different names like home and neighbors with different passwords. This feature always felt useless as they were both taking internet from the same phone cable. So, I went and did it. I created a second SSID with some unrecognizable name, so now 2 Wi-Fi signals appear, but the latter is strange and there's no need to bat an eye cause it's probably the new neighbors, or something. Chuckles. Then I logged in through the second Wi-Fi, and cut off the internet connection to the first SSID. I can now turn it on and off like it's a flip of a switch. This won't solve my evening problem, but it was the solution for later. Now, when I'm working, I don't need to check on my family members, I can just cut the connection while preserving mine. And I didn't have to touch my brother's phone. Oh well. Last one is titled, I Can Have My Pie and Eat It Too. When my cousins were much younger, around 5 and 8, I took them to a community celebration of the Chinese New Year. It was a potluck of sorts with activities and the dragon dance. On the way there, I stopped off at a big box store for a large cheesecake for me to bring for the potluck portion. The kids in the back were begging me all the way there for a little piece of that cheesecake. I was firm and said no, you can have a piece after your dinner there. Alas, that was not to be. The cheesecake was all gone. So to make up for it, I stopped off at a grocery store and said that they could have one piece of pie or cake of their choosing. The 5-year-old bring this whole entire pie for me to buy for him. I tell him only one piece. He maliciously looks at the pie and at me and said, it is one piece. I did buy one piece for each of them but managed to talk this smarty down to a smaller piece for fear of repercussions from him parents. Good kid. I watched what I said to them much more carefully after that. Thanks for listening.